Red Star Radio. Voice of the Revolution.
Let's watch some Gavin McInnes. This guy is the co-founder of Vice. He's actually a pretty funny guy, and he has his own YouTube channel where you can watch him be pretty funny and stuff. But this is not from his YouTube channel. This is from The Rebel, which is basically the remnants of the Sun News Network, which was basically like the Canadian version of Fox News that existed for a few years. So basically this guy has a bunch of videos on their website, their YouTube channel, where he's pretty right-wing. So he's still a little funny, even in this video where he's not even trying to be funny. But yeah, so let's watch. This is 5 reasons not to ban the Confederate flag from a Canadian immigrant, which is... right away in the title, it's kind of weird. Like, why does it matter that he's a Canadian immigrant? Yeah. It's kind of like he thinks like, ooh, I'm an immigrant. I got the SJWs now. They can't say anything because I'm an immigrant. Like, no, dude, you're still a white male North American. Like, what the fuck difference? What difference does it make?
Yeah, you know, it actually relates to this whole not your shield thing by Gamergate. And you're like, oh, look, we have so many minorities within our ranks.
Yeah.
You can't possibly be racist. We have a gay guy, even though he's a self-hating gay guy. We have a feminist, even though this feminist still, like, clearly doesn't, you know, all she ever does is criticize modern feminism and stand up for traditional gender roles and...
Oh, Summers, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, let's watch this. Content is rated RE for rebellious.
Hey everyone, down in Charleston,
Bullshit, he's a rebel. Bullshit.
Yeah, Confederate rebel.
Talking about taking down the Confederate flag, eh? I haven't yet been asked, but I'd like to give the Canadian perspective. I'm a Canadian immigrant.
Why do we need a Canadian perspective?
What I noticed here is how consumed they are with race.
Oh no, why is that?
Here it's race, racity, race, race, race. This country was built on slavery, it's still racist. Obama was just on Mark Maron's podcast the other day saying slavery and racism is in our DNA and
Hell, because it is. Like, for crying out loud, Jim Crow in the United States didn't end until recently. Canada's only recently apologizing for its, you know, actions towards Native Americans. Stuff like this, like, if it screwed over like a few generations, it's gonna take a few more generations to fix the problem.
Yeah, no
That's
shit.
The issue. And if he gets to claim being innocent because, you know, oh, look at me, I'm a Canadian, I'm not the most privileged group. Like, okay, like, screw you, I'm Armenian, I'm way less privileged than you are. So if we're playing a Russian Olympics, I already win this guy, right? Right?
They were horrible. Here's 5 reasons why you should not take down that.
Go Hyman.
In a totally unbiased, clinical way.
Totally unbiased, of
The
course.
numbers. The Civil War has to stay in our mind. All the flags involved.
All the flags.
Everything needs to be...
Fly them all.
All the Nazi flags need to be
exactly.
because you know, a whole bunch of Wehrmacht people died, and like, screw that. Like, the people who fought in the Civil War for the Confederate side more or less agreed with their government. The Wehrmacht didn't realize their mistake until much later. The difference is that the Wehrmacht realized what they did is wrong and don't want to be remembered like that anymore, whereas the Confederate legacy is just hurt that they lost the war. Next, you should go to a bunch of Armenians and tell them to go fly the Ottoman banner or something, because the Ottomans drafted a bunch of Armenians during World War I while they massacred the rest of the population. It's fucking hell.
Because we should never forget the stunning numbers of horrific deaths in this war. 620,000 people died. 500,000.
This part is basically just the same red herring.
They were dying of disease. They were
iterated over and over and over.
Up on my place upstate, there was a train that crashed carrying about 800 POWs.
People died, therefore
60 people died.
We need to fly the flag. Just keep flying it, who cares?
These people were dying from shrapnel in their knee. They were dying of exhaustion, of starvation. It is something we have to never forget.
Those poor Nazis were getting murdered by an army of pissed off Soviets because they tried to genocide the population. Nice logic.
What a tragedy.
What a tragedy.
Oh.
It was essentially an American Holocaust. Because the population of America...
Okay, no, like, and again, I know I keep dragging me being an Armenian a lot into this, but only because, like, it's the only first-hand example I can bring. So this is what I would say. Like a Holocaust or a genocide has to be a systematic attempt to exterminate a race and, prevent them from being remembered. There was no attempt to systematically exterminate Americans throughout the Civil War. This was an attempt to free slaves, who probably... I don't think the slaves were facing a Holocaust per se like the Native Americans were. I would say that, they were being kept enslaved, in bondage. That was why we fought the war. And if the Confederates didn't trust their government, they could have just rebelled. If their governments went up against the Union, then they should have also gone up against the Confederates as well. Get what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You can't always use the "I'm just following orders" excuse. Like, well, it's true that many in the Wehrmacht or the SS did during World War II, once they realized the full extent of what they did and what they supported, they learned their lesson, and, they don't want to be remembered like this. God.
Yeah. And another thing is, like there was a popular expression at the time. I think Noam Chomsky mentioned this in his essay called On Anarchism. And he said something along the lines of that most Southerns who fought in the war didn't even own slaves. I mean, most Southerns at the time didn't even own slaves because it was only the rich that did. And a popular expression at the time, even in the Union as well, was poor man's battle, rich man's war. Because they understood that they were fighting for the rich. It wasn't really a war for slavery or any of that. Just kind of profit versus profit. Just another capitalist competition sort of thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Because the population of America was about 35 million, the same as the population of Canada. So when you look at proportional to the entire population, it would be like 6 million dying today. 6 million. Ring any...
Ring any bells?
Jesus Christ.
Yes, of course it rings bells, because the Confederates were a bunch of racist white supremacist assholes who got their ass kicked by, those supposedly inferior Northern Americans and those, Black Americans. And the Nazis would later try to do the same, only to get their ass kicked by a mixture of Slavic, Turkic, Armenian, and Georgian supposedly inferior race people.
bells?
Yeah.
Vietnam was 60,000. 620,000 is about what all Americans have died in all wars. So, devoid of context, devoid of how it makes people feel, we need to remember these poor bastards who died.
No, we don't. We can we can write down where they died, and you would say this isn't dedicated to those guys who fought in this battle X and X, but you don't have to fly goddamn Confederate banners the entire place around.
That's the point.
Yeah, that's
you can commemorate it all you want. You just don't have to do it that way.
Yeah, and you can commemorate people, dying in a war, but you're just saying this is where they died. The end. We're saying this is where they died. Oh, what a how poor and misunderstood they were. I'm like, okay, maybe they didn't realize what they were doing was wrong at that time, but honestly, there was no reason for them not to understand. To be honest.
I find it weird he calls them poor bastards if we're trying to commemorate them. Just seems kind of disrespectful from his viewpoint to me.
Yeah, it's just his style.
Yeah.
Okay, move on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right, on both sides. And that brings me to number 2. I'm sorry, I'm not buying that this...
Oh, I don't buy it.
Yes, it was. Look into any declaration of secession from the South, and they will always be mentioning slaves.
You know what they say? Those who know nothing about the Civil War think that it's about slavery. Those who know a little bit about it think that it's about economics and states' rights. Those who know a lot about it know that it is about slavery.
Right.
It is about economics and states' rights, which is in turn about slavery.
Yeah, it was the state's right to own slaves to fuel their economy.
Yeah, exactly.
Civil War was about slavery. You talk to these soldiers, okay, let's get in a time machine and talk to these soldiers, and they'll talk like all other soldiers. And you know what soldiers talk about? Their brothers. That guy right there. That's who they're fighting for.
I'm pretty sure the Wehrmacht said the same thing about their Germans. Oh, don't worry, we're protecting ourselves from the inferior Jews and Slavic boogeymen. Like, give me a goddamn break. They should have known why their government was seceding, and even if they didn't, they were still serving it.
Well,
and the North wasn't the North wasn't going to come to genocide the southern USA population. They wanted them to get rid of their goddamn slaves. That would have technically killed no white American at all, but the Confederate government chose to fight the Union over the right to own slaves, and the jackboots followed along.
But I mean, that's how nationalism works.
Exactly.
They don't see themselves as fighting for the economic interests of the ruling class. They see themselves as fighting for their country.
Protect their brothers. They weren't out there in the battlefield going, I'm going to keep my slaves. You're not taking my slaves. They're making me rich. I'm a racist. I love slavery. Oh, you got me. Oh, well, I died.
Except they were goddamn racists. Like, even if they didn't own slaves, the Confederate nationalism was way too much blood.
Most of the Union troops are probably racist too, not that it matters. And he's going to try to make the case that it does.
Right.
The Civil War was just as much about the North pushing the South around.
Okay.
Forgot about that.
Okay, guys. Whenever a racist or a white supremacist says they're not racist because they have a black friend, H.K. Edgerton is who they are talking about.
It was about the South not wanting to be told what to do. It was about the South wanting to secede
with their
North.
slaves.
And maybe they should have. Was it worth 620,000 people dying?
Yeah,
yes.
Unfortunately it was.
Pretty much.
Mm-hmm. And that brings me to point number 3. What is this?
Another red herring.
Being a non-racist, he was the great white...
No, of course he was racist. He didn't want to free the slaves at the beginning of the war. He didn't want to free the slaves when he ran for office. I mean, yeah, people don't know that because they don't study the history. It doesn't mean that it makes any difference.
Exactly. Like, I'm pretty sure if you were to ask what Marx and Engels thought about gays and, ironically enough, Jews, they would have probably said the typical 19th century response. But, like, we're not supposed to debunk Marx and Engels on the grounds that they held 19th century views on gays and Jews and whatever. Is it going to really matter if, if you are ultra racist and you lead a movement to free the slaves, I'm pretty sure to be like, cognitive dissonance, but thanks for freeing the slaves, even if you are a racist shitbag. Right?
Yeah.
I'm not buying that America's racist. I don't see it. I think it's a lie.
It's a lie. Someone just made it up.
They're gonna vote for a candidate who wants to screen Muslims the same way the Nazis screened the Jews, the Ottomans screened the Arabs and North Africans and Iranians, the same way the British treated the Indians and Australian Aboriginals. God damn it.
I don't buy it.
Kowtowing to minorities than there is crapping on them.
Yeah, we're kowtowing.
But they're in jail because they've been enabled with welfare and single to give their children
this is where it gets really ugly.
Caught up in this stupid drug war.
No, they're going to jail because of both conservative and liberal attempts to keep them, poor and not revolting. This is where the Marxism comes in. The Marxism comes in because these black people are poor because you kept them enslaved, and your liberal attempts to give them welfare has prevented any class consciousness from rising amongst the black population of the United States, and in turn this puts them out of limbo. They are convinced that these programs will help them and to not make them class conscious, and yet they're still kept, and that racism and bondage still keeps them impoverished.
It's not about racism, it's about poorism. And I think a total racist.
Okay, sure, it is about poorism, but they're poor because of the racism they felt. Get it? He doesn't get it.
Of course not.
Obviously, material conditions do breed racism itself, but then we have to look into why those white like Americans that were owning slaves were bourgeois themselves. They had no reason to really be racist. While it was in their, although it was only in their economic self-interest to be a racist, although that proved not the case because now they're doing fine without slavery and whatnot.
Yeah.
And yet they continue to be racist anyway.
He thought blacks were inferior. He thought they should have the same laws as everyone else, but he thought good luck to them ever reaching any kind of success. They're too stupid. He didn't even like interracial marriage. So 2 and 3 are pretty similar, but I like the number 5. But this idea that it was about slavery and Lincoln was this anti-racist that saved us all is complete hogwash.
Okay, as I said before, Lincoln might not have been a true anti-racist, but he still led a pretty big anti-racist cause. So you can kind of see why we honor the Union but not the Confederacy.
Yeah. And I mean, it's true. It was very opportunistic. It wasn't really much on matter of principle on Lincoln's part. I don't think it was. He was able to get support from other countries by being against slavery. I think is the main reason why that happened. Not that it has anything to do with this Confederate battle flag, but anyway.
And that brings me to number 4. Why are we listening to this lunatic? He's insane. Look at his hair.
Because there are other people like him.
In 1927, there was a horrible occurrence, a disaster called the Bath School disaster. And this guy killed 27 children, blowing up a school. He did a bunch of terrorist attacks, and his beef was tax. Now, do we really think that we should have...
It has nothing to do with anything.
...investigated taxes after that? Should the IRS have closed their offices and we all stroke our beards and read his manifesto about...
Well, that's the problem. Racism is going to cause you to do inherently negative things. Taxes will not cause you to do inherently negative things unless you react to taxes in that negative way. Like, the point of racism is to subjugate, dominate, and sometimes kill.
Yeah, really.
Because you believe your race is superior. Taxes is like, okay, like, this is what the government's money is going to be taking from you. It might be negative, but, like, it's not going to cause, it's not the same kind of negativity.
Yeah, and this guy's trying to make Dylan Roof out to look like some lone wolf, as if there's no right-wing militias, as if there's no neo-Nazi groups, as if there was no such thing as the Ku Klux Klan for about 100 years, and even today... No, apparently that doesn't exist. Oh, but then if there's a couple Muslim terrorists in San Bernardino, that's literally ISIS taking over America, of course. Gotta love that logic.
Okay, let's move on.
Tax on behalf of the 27 children that were killed? No, we do the opposite of that. We don't listen to nuts. This isn't an example of racism. This is an example of crazyism. Yes, his manifesto was steeped in racist ideology. Who cares? He's nuts.
Who cares?
Start kowtowing to him and go, oh.
It has nothing to do with society.
It has
nothing to do with
Is that what
anything.
your manifesto wanted us to do? Is that how we listen to you? Sorry if I bumped the mic there.
He had a Rhodesia patch.
There's a number 5
Maybe we should look at Zimbabwe, but no, it has nothing to do with anything. Rhodesia was just a land of his imagination. It never happened.
No Americans seem to understand. America was not built on slavery. You did not have 400 years of free labor. After the Civil War, the balance sheet was 0. Anything that was built up from slavery.
No, you still had a lot of the infrastructure still intact, and even if it were to be, if it was all to be destroyed, America would have been sent back way too many years, basically. America was built on slavery, and even if the institution of slavery did end, there was still segregation, and blacks were still at a severe disadvantage to whites. They would have had to, they were the ones who had to work all the menial jobs and whatnot to build up the country.
Yeah, I mean, the abolition of slavery in the 1860s, 1870s was a mere formality in many ways. They were still sharecroppers. What's the term? They're basically, what do you call it? Like tenant farmers. They're like serfs. They had to work the land. The only difference was they had a bit of a choice in which master they could work for.
Yeah,
And yeah.
even business owners coming from the what was then like the Union, the North, coming down to the South to take part in sharecropping. It was like really profitable kind of business that was formed out of that. It just kind of didn't really solve anything. It's just more or less put him back into slavery in a sense.
Was gone. We all started on a blank slate after those
History didn't happen then.
1,000 men died to keep America unified. They didn't build this road. They didn't build this building. That's all post-Civil War. After the Civil War, this place looked like Haiti post-earthquake. It's not a country that was built on slavery. It's not a racist country. I'm a racist. I love slavery. Get over it.